welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. Hope everyone had a tremendous holiday weekend. I know we did. Our team at Lions247. Hope you did as well. We are regrouped. We have a lot planned for you at the site and here on the podcast this week. Next episode, got a fun exercise that's going to challenge four of us, Mark Brennan, Daniel Gallen, Tyler Calvaruso, and myself, on our knowledge of this roster. And it's also going to be a pretty good exercise to get, I think, everybody, including our listeners and viewers, ready for preseason camp. Kind of a little bit of a knowledge test for many of us, I think, on this Nittany Lions group. You'll see what I'm talking about a little bit later in the week. But we begin this week with two more commitments for Penn State. Last time we had Tyler Calvaruso on, we were discussing a pair of pickups for Penn State's 2026 recruiting class. Same deal this time around. Tyson Harley, an edge rusher, and offensive tackle Marlen Bright come on board last Saturday. Both of them doing that within about a 5 or 6 hour span of each other. And so now up to 25 total commitments is 2026 Penn State class for the Nittany Lions. Tyler Calvaruso, our resident recruiting insider, hopping back in right now to break down those two additions and much more. Tyler, good to get you back on the show.
Yeah, good to be back. Hope you had a good holiday weekend. Hope all of our listeners had a good holiday weekend. It was definitely a busy one for Penn State. They set off some fireworks on the recruiting trail, so we've got a bunch to get into.
That's right. It seems like it's an annual event now where Penn State and a lot of other schools can expect some commitment announcements on 4th of July or right around 4th of July. That did take place with two on July 5th. And Tyler, before we get into our recruiting conversation right now, I do want to tease our segment that we've got coming up after this. Mm-hmm. Daniel Gallen and I, on the last episode of this podcast, which went live Thursday right before the holiday, we broke down and ranked our top 10 roster newcomers for Penn State as they get ready to get back on the practice field in about a month. It was pretty heavy on the transfers, especially toward the top of those lists. And so we're going to circle back to you, Tyler, in a matter of minutes after we get through some of this commitment and recruitment talk. And you're going to rank your top 5 freshmen in terms of potential impact year one here on the field. So I look forward to that conversation because we had a lot to say about some of those guys. I think you do too, because no one knows that 2025 group better than you going back throughout much of their high school careers.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be a pretty fun exercise. It's actually one that I think a few of them might surprise you, might surprise people. I put a lot of thought into this. I think it's going to come down to not just talent, but really where the doors open at certain positions on the depth chart. So it's going to be a fun chat for sure. I'm looking forward to it.
Let's get into that in a little bit, but let's begin with the commitment of Marlen Bright, which was the first pickup on Saturday, July 5th. And this is one that we had anticipated for some time. And as he discussed with Brian Doan, he had his mind made up for a while. When he was visiting schools, well, it was really only one school this summer. It was Penn State. We got a chance to get eyeballs on him on a couple of different occasions within team facilities, including a big man challenge where he had a bunch of work with Phil Troutwine and the Penn State coaching staff. We have videos of that camp experience from Marlen Bright up on Monday over at Lions247.com. But when you look at this commitment, why was Penn State able to really put this one in cruise control essentially for the last month, maybe even 6 weeks as they transitioned from May to June? We had talked about this being essentially inevitable, and lo and behold, it was Penn State being the pick on Saturday.
Yeah, the official visit in May 30th through June 1st weekend was essentially the icing on the cake. It was kind of one of those things that finalized a pretty inevitable outcome. You know, going back to early stages of Bright's prep career at the Paul Catholic in North Jersey, where he's playing with Mike Troutman, who's a Penn State offensive lineman right now. Nittany Lions offered really early, and that was a big, big moment in Bright's recruitment as a whole. Now, I mean, his dad was getting emotional when the offer came in. It was just one of those kind of eye-opening, wow, I made it kind of moments for Marlen Bright. And from that point on, Penn State prioritized Bright heavily. I mean, Phil Troutwine took a very, very strong liking to him. And it was going to be tough to knock Penn State off the perch for other programs at that point. Rutgers, knocked on the door at one point. Syracuse knocked on the door at one point. Illinois tried to make a push with Bright during his April official visit. Stanford got an official visit, but there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding that program right now, so the Cardinals weren't able to hang around in the mix. It's a combination of the relationships at Penn State and having faith in Phil Troutman's developmental ability. Bright has put in so much work with him throughout his high school career, going from camping as a sophomore and getting his offer, really going into his sophomore year, camping at the end of his freshman year, going into his sophomore year, getting that offer, continuing to develop, continuing to get back to campus to work with the Penn State staff. He's got a ton of familiarity in State College, and that was a huge selling point for him. Comfort was a big thing for Marlen Bright. The relationships were a big thing for Marlen Bright. Now he's getting a call, pretty familiar place home.
247 Sports, we've got Bright as the number 43 overall offensive tackle in 2026 national rankings, one of the premier linemen from the state of New Jersey, plays at DePaul Catholic in Wayne, New Jersey. And Tyler, when you look at Bright, 6'6", 260 plus pounds, we got some looks at him, as I said, during the last month or so, including some work, on the blocking sled with Phil Trautwein. Very clearly well put together below the waist. And then you look at his upper body, and there's so much to build upon. And we've talked about it a bunch. I think people are well versed by now, but Phil Trautwein seems to have a type at tackle. There are some exceptions to that over the years and some of the body types that he has brought in, but largely it's been players that you can build up, kind of project forward. And so you think Marlen Bright is the latest example of that kind of evaluation?
I do. I think he's a little bit more refined than some of those type takes in the past. Some of those guys have been a little bit more raw and a little bit further along to go in their development. That's not to say Bright doesn't, because, he's a high school offensive lineman. He's going to have to grow if he wants to be a successful Power 4 offensive lineman. I mean that physically and mechanically as well, footwork, kicks, that everything that goes into being a high-level Power 4 offensive lineman. Marlen Bright's going to have to take some steps, but that's natural. Again, we're talking about a 17-year-old offensive lineman who still has a lot ahead of him. I'm really intrigued to see what he's going to add upper body strength-wise, because there's a lot to work with there. Bright was saying after his commitment, when he got his Penn State offer, he was so skinny, he didn't even look like an offensive lineman walking around. Look like he might play another position. So I feel like there's still a lot untapped there. He's undoubtedly added strength as his high school career has gone on, but I think there's still a lot for the Penn State strength and conditioning staff to work with there and just kind of mold and build up as time goes on. So, yeah, it's definitely another one of those. Phil Trautwein has a type kind of moments, but I do think Bright is a little bit more refined than some of the guys we've categorized in that realm in the past.
You're going to have a chance, I'd imagine, to get back to your old stomping grounds in New Jersey, maybe get in front of Marlen Bright at some point during his senior season. Based on what you've evaluated of him so far and what you've discussed perhaps with Penn State's recruiting department, what are you going to be most closely kind of tuned into with his development during his senior film?
I think it's going to be the lower half footwork, the mechanics. Where's that kick step and pass pro? As he continue to play low? Because, sometimes I saw him as a sophomore. So, again, it's a tough judgment when he's playing against North Jersey competition. I believe it was his first year as a full-time starter. He played plenty as a freshman. First year as a full-time starter. He's going up against Bishop McDevitt from Harrisburg, which is everyone knows is a really good Pennsylvania program. He had his hands full, but he still looked really, really solid to me. So I think just kind of, for me personally, because I have that experience to reflect on from a couple years ago, I'm looking to see more strides because he's definitely made them from sophomore year to junior year. The tape is a lot more improved. He's more technically sound. I think senior year, he's going to be at a point where it's going to be tough for some of those talented North Jersey edge rushers, and there's plenty of them on Penn State's board as well. He's going to be a tough guy to get around. So I want to see how he maintains his quickness as he continues to grow physically, as he continues to add weight. I want to see how he is in the lower half with his footwork. And I want to see if he maintains those strong hands that I saw him have as a sophomore, because that was a big reason why he was able to be successful early on. His hand placement was really, really solid. It allowed him to redirect Bishop McDevitt, D linemen, linebackers trying to get down, make plays against the run from the second level. So there was a lot that I liked from that performance, and I think Bright's only gotten better since then. And I'm excited to hopefully get the chance to see him as a senior. It's definitely something that's on my to-do list.
Perhaps it's not the dream offensive line class that some people tried to squint and envision coming out of the spring and into the summer, but suddenly 5 guys now on board. For a long time, Tyler, this was the Kevin Brown show, and we remained so high on the Harrisburg standout and on the offensive line and what he can mean for the Nittany Lions. But he has plenty of company now in the form of 4 commitments that have come on board in about the last 2.5 months or so. So with 5 guys in the class, and most recently it's been Jake Fuchs coming on board and followed by Marlen Bright in about a 1-week span, where does this place Phil Trautwein, his recruiting board for 2026? And is there now less of a sense of urgency and more of an opportunity to sit back and maybe watch your board unfold in some new ways in the remaining months left on this cycle?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a less of a sense of urgency now to go out and get some of these things done, because now you've got the numbers at the position. You've really addressed kind of everywhere that you wanted to address on the offensive line in this 26 haul. So at this point now, you kind of sit back, see how things go during the fall. Emmanuel Iheanacho came off the board over the weekend. He's going to Oregon, 5-star target, was a big-time target for Penn State. Who knows how that recruitment's going to play out down the stretch. So you keep an eye on guys like that as the fall progresses. Maybe you get a flip target or two back to campus for the whiteout game against Oregon in September. Iheanacho's a guy who he went on Twitter and said he was going to be at that whiteout game in September. I guess he'll be doing it as an Oregon commit now, but again, who knows with him? That's a recruitment that has taken so many twists and turns, and Oregon has been very competitive there financially. So we've been through all that. But when it comes to the 26 offensive line board, I think they've accomplished what they want to accomplish. And now, you kind of wait and see, and you lurk late in the cycle, maybe a late riser, or maybe a recruitment that was previously closed becomes open again.
I can't see Iheanacho.
No, neither can I.
He sticks out anywhere that he is standing in a crowd wearing bright green to a whiteout in late September. If anything, I could see him maybe wearing white and making the Ducks coaching staff a bit nervous over the occasion. But we'll see where it goes. I'm reminded a bit of when Alabama native Dakari Nelson, I think it was, attended the Auburn matchup that they went down and pounded Auburn. He was technically a recruiting guest to the Tigers that day, but he was committed to Penn State. I know he was smiling for much of that matchup. Something to look at down the road. Obviously, he's the biggest fish in that pond when you look at the offensive line class of 2026. Now that target board has worked out. But as you said, coming off the board to another Big Ten program. 5 guys on board for offensive line, 25 players total in the 2026 class. And the 25th addition to it was Tyson Harley. We shift our attention, Tyler, down toward D.C., and that is Gonzaga College High School, which is routinely where you'll find power conference recruits. And they had a couple really strong ones on the defensive line in this 2026 class. Penn State actually hosted them together for an official visit. Tell us a little bit about where the other guy is going and ultimately why Tyson Harley is here in Happy Valley come 2026.
Yeah, Penn State offered in the winter, and that wasn't, Harley's initial appearance on Deion Barnes' edge rusher board. He camped for the Penn State staff the previous summer, and they kept an eye on his junior season film. And, it was junior season film where he was more productive than Carter Meadows. And as high as Carter Meadows' ceiling is, it says a lot that Harley was able to go out there and have some pretty strong showing against some high-level competition down in the DMV as a kid who's still developing his tool set as a pass rusher and still coming into his own. Everyone talks about Carter Meadows' ceiling, and no doubt about it, it's one of the highest in the 26 class. But Tyson Harley has a pretty high ceiling in his own right. He might even have a higher floor, if we're being honest. I'm a big fan of his prospect profile. I think it has the potential to go down as a steal for Penn State. I think Harley, he's one of those guys who once he gets into a college program or he's working with a defensive line coach like Deion Barnes on a daily basis, when he's in that strength and conditioning program on a daily basis, working with Chuck Losey, building his body to handle the rigors of playing in the Big Ten and really fine-tuning who he is as a defensive end and as a pass rusher, I think he has a chance to make some pretty significant jumps in his development and become a high-level player at Penn State. Again, the production on tape really stands out to me because playing, you can make the argument that playing opposite a guy like Carter Meadows makes things a little bit easier for you, but go watch Tyson Harley's film and look at the way that he's winning on the outside. He's getting the job done all on his own, and again, he's doing it as a kid who's still coming into his own as a pass rusher. So if you're a Penn State fan, I think that's plenty of reason to be excited about this commitment.
Carter Meadows, of course, a top 50 recruit on the defensive line, and as an edge rusher, I talked about them coming up in tandem for their official visit. He's going to play college ball in Michigan based on his current commitment that came in late June. But with Harley, can you talk us through the recruitment process? Because it was pretty contentious. I know there was more of a spotlight on Meadows because of that ranking. Harley is the number 49 edge rusher nationally. He's a high 3-star right now. In our evaluation, he's a 4-star composite. But as I said, not quite the shine of a recruitment as his teammate. But behind the scenes, how much of a battle did Penn State face to actually bring him on board?
Honestly, Penn State profiled as Harley's visit or his leader going into official visit season. He took a few, made it out to Rutgers, made it out to Michigan State, Maryland, Virginia Tech. They got official visits from Harley, but Penn State profiled as the leader going in, and I think the official visit kind of just really solidified that. It was kind of like Marlen Bright, where we were told, "Hey, look, now that this OV is done, all the post-OV feedback, keep a really close eye on this one." And usually when we get hints like that, you got a pretty strong sense of where one's heading. And he went out and he made his Maryland visit. He made his Virginia Tech visit after that. But it was still reading all Penn State at this point. The rankings-wise, it is what it is with Harley. Yeah, I think he's in a pretty solid spot where he's at in his development, but I think he could be a 4-star kid when it's all said and done. And I would just encourage people to go look at the offer list because it's a really impressive one. I mean, there was a time where programs like Georgia, Michigan were pushing pretty hard. They decided to take things elsewhere, but I always say it, and, this goes whether it be a kid in favor of Penn State or going against Penn State. Just because other schools decide to go in a different direction at some point in your recruitment doesn't detract from who you are as a player, because you got those offers and you were seriously considered at one point. Harley falls into that realm. And Penn State identified Harley earlier than some of those programs. They identified all of the traits that they look for in an edge rusher. They came together, decided Harley has them, and it didn't really take long for him, once the offer rolled in, to become a priority target for Deion Barnes. They got him to campus in April for a visit. That visit is, from what I've gathered, is the reason why Penn State was the leader going into official visit season and why they were able to hold on the strength of the official visit. They just did a really good job selling the developmental aspect and all of the off-the-field stuff about how he would feel at home at Penn State. And Harley even said it after his commitment. Penn State was one of those schools growing up. He would look at him and say, oh, I'd love to play there. Well, now he is.
Yeah, major length off the edge with Harley, 6'4" plus, going towards 220 pounds now with the year of high school ahead of him. And for a while, Daniel Jennings looked like the lead edge rusher in this 2026 class. Of course, he reclassifies, becomes the final addition to the 2025 freshman class that we're going to talk about in just a little while, Tyler. But on the heels of what was a very large group of edge rushers to sign with Deion Barnes and Penn State in 2025, you've now got back-to-back weeks where you get a commitment at that position. Harley follows Jackson Ford. Is this an area where we expect the numbers to be a bit more modest come signing day this December versus what we saw take place last winter, and then especially when you add the cherry on top in Jennings?
Could be. It's really going to come down to how some recruitments play out late. Again, we touched on keeping an eye on flip guys down the road. I've thrown out, YD Collier as a name, maybe a guy Penn State circles back on at some point in the cycle. He's committed to Rutgers, but we'll see. There's a long way to go between now and the early signing period in December. Deion Barnes was working on some flips late last cycle. They almost pulled one off with Cedric Works, who wound up at Florida. But right now, the numbers are right there. I think everything looks good at the position. I think there's a feeling of being content at where things are at the position right now. So you're not going to reach and just, take another edge to take another edge. You'll monitor some late risers as well, as Penn State does at every position, but kind of geared more towards now keeping an eye on flip season, because it sounded like Carter Gooden, who's a top 100 edge rusher out of Tabor Academy in Massachusetts, sound like he's going to be headed to UCLA. And that was really the biggest fish left on the board on the edge for Penn State. Sounds like that one's heading in a different direction. So I think that leads us at a point where you keep an eye on how things play out with certain kids during the fall.
There's been so many announcements in the last 2 or 3 weeks as official visits came to a close, and guys wanted to kind of put it public and do the best they could to lower the recruiting noise as they prepare for their senior preseason camps and closing out high school strong and all that. So we knew this timeline would be eventful. We've seen Penn State's recruiting class jump up to 25 commits. We've also seen several long-term notable Nittany Lions targets announce they're going elsewhere. So as we pick things up here to start the second week of July, and we got 25 guys on board, where are you turning your focus next? Whether it's a position, whether it's a storyline, what remains kind of unresolved with this 2026 recruiting class, in your opinion?
I think you still want to add at a few other positions. They're going to keep an eye on a potential second quarterback in the class. It kind of, I keep saying it, but it's kind of a theme. You're at that point where you got 25 guys in the class in, I guess, early July still. It's not middle yet. Yeah, early July. And you're in a comfortable spot in terms of numbers. I could still see this class landing in that 27, 28 range. That would probably come in the form of maybe a flip or two, maybe a late riser really standing out to the staff, earning an offer, like a guy like Zion Tracy, who really popped onto the scene late in his recruitment. But even that's a little bit different now, because you don't have that end of July camp for late risers to get out and for the staff to get a look at them. That's wiped out with all of July being a dead period now. So there's going to be more of a reliance on senior season film in that regard, and the testing data that you already have available at your disposal. Keep an eye on quarterback, running back. Maybe we'll see, they're pretty good with Messiah Mickens as their number one running back and only running back in that class, given the numbers at the position, because you're looking at a pretty crowded depth chart next year. So taking one in this class wouldn't be, it wouldn't be the worst outcome either. Messiah Mickens, that's a guy they're really, really high on. Wide receiver, you think you looked at another, losing Travis Johnson to Michigan over the holiday weekend wasn't ideal. That was a guy Penn State really, really liked, and he had a good relationship with Marcus Higgins. He's going off to Ann Arbor. Penn State chipped away at that one all the way until the end. Maybe that's when they continue to chip away at during the fall. Offensive, defensive line, we already touched on that. Linebacker, they're looking good. They're pretty content with the trio that they have on board with Elijah Littlejohn and all those guys. Terry Wiggins, Matthew Lama. It's a really good group that Dan Connor has assembled, and they're really happy with it. So things look good in the secondary as well. The one guy I would circle in the secondaries, maybe keep an eye on him during the fall. Well, two guys really. Kari Adams, they're going to continue to work on. Dorian Barney, they'll probably continue to work on as well. Adams, of course, committed to Notre Dame. Barney went off the board to Michigan on Saturday, as expected. So that's a guy they could circle back on. And it's safety. I mean, again, you continue to recruit Joey O'Brien, see what happens, but you're strong in numbers there. And, hey, look, you're even strong in the specialist department now with Adam McCann-Gibbs on board. So they're in a good spot. It's really kind of taking a breath, sitting back, putting a little bit more focus on building that 27 class now and seeing how things unfold down the stretch here in 26.
All right, good stuff, Tyler. And we know as things unfold a bit further for this class, you'll have us covered at Lions247.com. We'll discuss it here on the podcast as well. But that's where things are this second week of July. Things could change in a big way by next week, but maybe a little bit of time to come up, catch your breath, take a closer look at this recruiting class, and then we'll see what happens next. Tyler, I want to bring you in on this conversation about the first-year Nittany Lions that we need to be looking closely at when preseason camp opens in less than 4 weeks now. As I said at the top of the show, and hopefully people caught our last episode, which dropped on Thursday, July 3rd, Daniel Gallen and I went 10 through 1, ranking our new players for Penn State in terms of 2025 impact. We're not talking about who's going to be good in 2027 or 2028, who's going to be a top NFL draft prospect 3 or 4 years from now. We're talking about who is ready to contribute against Nevada on August 30th, who's going to help this team potentially beat Ohio State in Columbus on November 1st. We're talking right here, right now, 2025. And so it's a hard task for freshmen to take on that kind of role. We saw a big jump in involvement from that freshman class in 2022. Drew Aller, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, Denai Dennis Sutton, Abdul Carter. That's a long list, and they are, many of them, still at the forefront of what Penn State hopes to accomplish now. Tyler, you have spent years literally wrapping your head around this freshman class. Many of them, you got your first conversations in when they were high school sophomores, high school juniors, and now here they are on the verge of having a chance to really go out on the proving ground of a preseason college camp and stake claim to some kind of role, whether it's on special teams, offense, defense, and then try to build from there. And when Big Ten play rolls around and Oregon visits Happy Valley, you and I both know the number of freshmen involved in that field, they're going to dwindle. And so it's going to be a pretty small group at the end of the day of young, talented players who are going to force their way into that conversation. And much of that work will be done in the month of August. So, Tyler, without further ado, we're going to let you go from number 5 to number 1. We're not going to ask you for 10 because that's a little too much chunk of this freshman class, I think. But who do you got at number 5? I'm curious about this. We haven't seen your list yet. And as I said, you're so familiar with the athletic traits of these guys. And I know you've followed up quite a bit on their arrivals since they got to campus.
Yeah, kicking things off at number 5, I'm actually going to start a wide receiver. I'm going to go with Jeff Exner. He's been making a lot of noise since he arrived on campus. He wasn't an early enrollee, but the good thing with Exner, he comes from a program at McDonough School down in Maryland where those guys, when they get to a college campus, it might not be early, but they're ready to roll when they do. They're very well versed in where they need to be from an on and off the field perspective. And Exner has quickly won over a lot of fans inside of Lash, and he has been physically impressive throughout his time on campus since he has arrived in town. So we'll touch on another wide receiver in a little bit. And obviously the center of the wide receiver really conversation right now is the transfer portal additions, and rightfully so because they're veteran guys who are more likely to make an impact for you in 2025. But Exner, we've had him billed as a high floor kind of kid right off the bat, a kid who was coming in a little bit more physically advanced than some of the others in this class. So based on that, based on the door being cracked open at wide receiver, because there is still plenty of room for a young guy or two to step up and claim some sort of role in this Penn State passing attack in 25. Exner, he's my number 5 guy on the list. So I think Penn State fans should be keeping a really close eye on him. Again, might not happen early in the year, but maybe later on in the year as, guys get banged up. Maybe some ineffective plays out of some guys. It's not what you hope for, but that's the reality of college football sometimes. Maybe a guy like Exner could break through and start making an impact in that passing attack. Number 4.
That's a fun one because Daniel and I both had Kobe Howard on our top 10 list. Mm-hmm. I think we'll probably hear about him from you, I'm guessing. And then we flirted with the idea of Lyric Samuel because of the way he's finished strong in spring camp. He's been able to add some good weight to a pretty tantalizing frame. But neither of us ventured into Jeff Exner Jr. territory. And, of course, we got Matthew out in that mix as well. What exactly – because there's a lot of guys chomping at the bit to get some kind of role. What exactly has he been able to accomplish without getting onto a practice field that you've gathered that has turned heads? Because I think people listening to this are like, how is he making an impression if he hasn't put pads on yet? They're putting in daily work in Lash and beyond Lash. But based on what you've heard, how can a guy get to campus in May or June and then get to the preseason camp and maybe have momentum despite not having any reps?
Yeah, and that's a fair question, especially from the outside perspective, right? It's fair to wonder how a guy who hasn't been around as long as some of the others is going to be able to come in and make an impact. It just comes down to the refinery aspect of it again. Physically, he's further along than a guy like Lyric Samuel, like you mentioned. He needs to tack on some weight. That's just the fact of the matter, and he does. He needs to come along physically. He's more refined as a receiver than a guy like Matthew Allen, who we've lauded as a potentially elite athlete in this class, given the testing data we have available to us. Once he puts things together, he could be a special wide receiver for Penn State, but he's not quite at that point. So Exner, he kind of jumps those two in the potential early impact conversation. And you mentioned Howard, they're kind of in that same ilk. Now, the difference between those two guys is, and again, Howard had that spring ball where he really impressed. He did it in a setting that opened a lot of eyes for the Penn State staff. So that's why Exner is the first receiver that we're going to get into here. But yeah, no, that's a good question because, again, he hasn't been around long. You got to wonder, how does a guy hit the ground running when the pads aren't on yet and fall camp hasn't started yet? But for me and from what I've gathered, it comes down to the refinery aspect of it. He's coming in maybe a little bit more ahead of the curve than some of the others at the position.
I love they didn't shy away from a summer enrollee because we were talking about that last episode. How much do you penalize a guy for not being around spring ball, for not being around winter conditioning in a conversation like this? And right off the bat, you weren't afraid. Who's number 4 for you?
Jameer Joseph at corner. Yeah, it kind of comes back to what I said about him throughout his recruitment about being a really battle-tested kid. He's going up against guys like 5-star Quincy Porter out at Bergen Catholic playing in North Jersey. Every week, Jameer Joseph and his St. Joe's Montvale team, they were seeing high-level wideouts. And every week, it was Jameer Joseph being asked to go kind of shadow and deal with that number 1 wideout. And he held his own more often than not. He's got the athletic profile. He's got really just, again, he's kind of like Exner in the sense where he's advanced. He's refined. He's very fluid in coverage. He's a ball hawk down the field when he has to be. He is not scared to come down and help out in the run game. I can tell you that. I've seen that on Jameer Joseph's tape time and time again. He'll come down and he'll hit you, and he'll remind you that he's there to hit you throughout the game. He's not one of those corners who shies away from run support, and we've seen it. Terry Smith, if a young guy comes in and he has that kind of competitive juice and he's showing you something on the practice field, he can come in and really make that kind of noise and burn through a red shirt in year 1. So that's why I've got Jameer Joseph at my 4.
I had him on my list too, and for many of the reasons you said. But to finish off and to add Terry Smith, I mean, there's probably not an assistant coach on this staff where I've seen lean into a freshman, almost annually. It feels like where he'll burn that red shirt, and there'll be a special teams role. And I love that pick and picking Joseph for this. Number 3 for you.
Yeah, now we're going to get to Kobe Howard. And it comes back to really kind of everything that we saw during spring ball. I mean, he looked crisp. He's gotten a lot faster, too. I think that's the big sticking point here for Kobe Howard. I mean, he's gone from a kid who was like high 4.6s, low 4.7s at one point in his high school career. I mean, he's in that 4.4, 4.5 range now. So it's a testament to his work ethic. And the on-field practice production kind of speaks for itself, right? That hype tape that Kobe Howard put out there for himself, all of his spring ball highlights. I mean, look, I said it when it came out. spring ball hype is what it is, but we know it was just more than a few clips for Kobe Howard. He was giving that Penn State secondary some issues throughout spring ball, and I think he's got some legitimate juice to his game. I think he's, again, we've talked about that gruesome leg injury Kobe Howard suffered early in his high school career, early on, how it caused some schools to kind of shy away, take things in a different direction. I think Kobe Howard is truly, truly back to being himself, who he is, and kind of why he was such a lauded prospect earlier in his prep career. I think he's fully back to being that guy. I think we've gotten glimpses of that, and I think we're going to continue to get glimpses of that.
You're discussing Jeff Exner a few minutes ago and talking about, hey, it might not be game one. It might be later in the season where he kind of claims a rotational role, makes himself a presence on the offense in some way, shape, or form. Been a long time, Tyler, several seasons since we saw a freshman show up to the field for the season opener, and you can point and say he's going to play a lot of snaps. He might be starting by the end of September. Been about 5 years since we had that kind of a conversation. Could you see us having that dialogue in late August about Kobe Howard pretty much saying, yeah, he's going to be a part of the plan game one? And is that why you're willing to maybe bump him up a little bit more in these rankings?
It is why I'm willing to bump him up, and I could see a world where that happens. But you got to remember, too, I'm still kind of hesitant because we were having these conversations, maybe not at this level, but we were having these kinds of conversations about a guy like Tyson Denmark last offseason.
Yes, we were.
It didn't exactly play out that way in short order. We're looking more at him now, year two, come in, potentially make a big-time impact. So maybe he's a little bit more ahead of the curve and Kobe Howard in that kind of spot. It also is going to come down to, do the transfers stay healthy throughout fall camp? Are they impactful throughout fall camp? Are they giving the Penn State staff the kind of looks at wide receiver that the Penn State staff wants out of their wideouts? So there's a bunch that goes into it. So I'm willing to have the conversation. I could see a world where that pops up. And maybe even if he's not in that top four group, maybe he's seeing some snaps here and there in certain packages, certain plays where Andy Kotelnicki wants to accomplish a certain something. But again, you got to pump the brakes a little bit just because we've had these talks in the past, and you see a guy maybe a little bit later in the year at the earliest.
Denmark conversation last summer does remind me of this a little bit. Difference is Denmark comes to campus in mid to late June, right? Whereas Kobe Howard's turning heads in winter conditioning, and then he's turning heads on the spring camp field. And so hopefully that's more of a head start if you're Penn State staff and you're looking for something from your year one wide receivers. I will say we saw them get the ball to him a bunch near the line of scrimmage. I think 3 or 4 pass completions during the blue-white game. He only got like 10 yards. But clearly they see him as a player to get involved in space. But they have a few guys like that, and I just don't know what the pecking order is going to look like in that slot role, right? You've got Tyson Denmark taking some claim there. You've got Trevor Pena played about 75% of his snaps at Syracuse in the slot last year. Liam Clifford was essentially your lead slot guy last year in 2024. And so that could be a conversation that maybe inhibits him from getting a lot of work early, especially when you factor in 12 personnel with those 2 tight end sets and maybe even some two running back sets along the way. We're in your top 2. I think we're done with wide receivers. So where do you turn now?
Oh, man, this deciding this top 2 was tough in terms of order because these are 2 kids that I really, really like. They're immensely talented. And I hinted at it earlier where depth chart could play a big part in my decision-making process here as opposed to natural raw talent. And all these guys are naturally raw and talented. But this was tough for me to do, and I think my number 2 might give a hint as to who my number 1 is. But I'm going to go number 2, Darius Dixon in the secondary. If we had this conversation a couple months ago, Dixon would have been my 1. So there's another hint about who the top guy on this list is. But I mean, man, ever since Darius Dixon got to campus, during bowl prep, he hasn't just come in and been an encouraging early enrollee. He's come in and been a guy who's looked like he's been here for a couple of years already, which, I mean, it doesn't really surprise me based on everything we heard about him during his prep career at Modern Day. He's kind of like the West Coast version of Jameer Joseph, but on even a little bit higher of a level. Every week he's going up against high level wideouts, and what was he doing every week? He more often than not he was dominating, and he was billed as arguably the most physical cornerback prospect on the West Coast. We all know that's something Terry Smith probably heard and smiled from ear to ear because that just fits everything he wants out of his corners. Another kid who's not going to shy away from contact, coming up in the run, really has everything you could ask for out of a covered corner. He's even got positional versatility. If you want to throw him back there at safety, then, in certain packages, it's something that he can do. It's something he's done before. But, man, I really love Darius Dixon's upside at corner. And I don't think it's a long-term future. I think the future could be now for him.
Yeah, he was my number one freshman when we were putting our list together. I've felt that way really since last December. But I think the guy that's given him a run for the money, who I had at number 2, I believe you'll have at number 1. Again, I haven't seen your list, but we're heading back to edge rusher, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. It's Javon Camacho. And again, some of this, Javon Camacho has been awesome since enrolling early. People inside of Flash have raved about him really at every opportunity in edge rusher conversations. They love what he has accomplished. They love where he's heading. He's a little what I think my main take was he's a little less raw coming in than we might have thought, because he took some really big strides as a senior on the developmental front. So he hasn't had to play as much from behind as we originally anticipated from a skill set perspective. And look, Max Granville going down opens the door for these young guys. Which young guys are going to be, I don't know yet. But Javon Camacho has every opportunity, talent-wise and now depth chart-wise, to really open eyes during fall camp and be that guy. Again, do I know if he's going to be that guy? No, because you've got a lot of young and talented defensive ends in the room. But I'm putting my money on him at number 1. I just like it. Again, on-field playing time opportunity versus the internal feedback from since he's joined the program as an early enrollee. It's just been so positive, and it's tough for me to keep him away from the number 1 spot with all of that in mind.
There's like 5 or 6 guys in that room that we just haven't seen much of in an Indy Lions uniform. That includes Anai White, who's a 4th-year college player, former top 100 prospect, spent the last 3 years with the Texas A&M program. But you start talking about all these redshirt freshmen. You start talking about the true freshmen, and I'm with you. Camacho and I would also say Jalen Harvey are the 2 that in conversations have stood out. But they got to go and do it for a few weeks in August before we get a chance to see them have that opportunity against Nevada. I think one thing that has stood with me, there was a few days left in spring camp, and we were chatting with Dion Barnes, and he referenced this switch that he said he really hasn't seen before, especially from a young player like Camacho, who at that point had been on campus for 3 or 4 months. And he said he goes from being this, model character kind of kid to being this violent specimen. And he says to see that happening, it's encouraging, it's eye-opening. And I think to hear a coach giving that evaluation when a kid at that point had 13 or 14 college practices under his belt leads me to believe that bigger things lie ahead for Camacho. And that's a spot where they need it. Out of everything we just discussed, I mean, wide receivers well hammered, right? They need new wide receivers to step up, but they got 3 transfers there. Defensive end is the area where it seems the door is wide open, and Camacho may be the man to meet that moment. Tyler, we gave ourselves an opportunity once we gave our top 10 newcomers list to kind of talk about who was left just outside the door by the bouncer on our list. So I think it's worth noting that these aren't always going to mesh with the rankings and ratings. You're going to go look at a guy that we love, a 5-star offensive lineman that Penn State signed, and Malachi Goodman. But a few things there. He's starting his career at left tackle. They've got some nice depth there. They've got guys who've been around for a while, and he's somebody who got to campus in June. He's awesome athletically. He's going to be in a really good spot. But again, we're not talking about who's going to be a first-round draft talent in 2028 or 2029. We're talking about who's going to be impacting this particular season. And so with that in mind, Tyler, anybody else that you feel like you need to make part of that conversation and who gave you some serious consideration of maybe swapping Jeff Exner out at number 5?
Yeah, 3 guys really starting. We'll just go positional order wise. Tyke Hayes at running back. It's one of those deals where the depth chart is just so crowded. But Tyke Hayes has been another vastly impressive guy behind the scenes and physically. We've seen him out and about, just around during 7-on-7 season and camp season. He's bulked up and he's just strong kid. He's built like an ox. He always has been. He's got that speed and athleticism blend. So I think his time will be coming in the running back room. It might not be this year just because of who's ahead of him on the depth chart and the numbers at the position. But love his upside. Andrew Olish, pretty much the same exact deal. Tight ends depth chart is what it is. Maybe a little bit more of an opportunity to crack something there, but Luke Brown, Andrew Rappia, Dinkins, there's a lot there, and it's going to be tough to break through in year 1. But again, his future could be in the short term at Penn State. And for me, really, this last guy, just because he's a freak, and I think he could shock people just based on who he is, Chaz Coleman. People think he has NFL draft upside. So guys like that, you always got to throw him in this kind of conversation. You think he's a little bit not as developed as others, and he is coming in late because he played his senior season of basketball out in Ohio. So he's coming in a little bit later and not as an early enrollee, but he's a freak. Not many guys built like him. So I had to throw him in this conversation for sure.
Good stuff from Tyler Calvaruso, who has great background, context knowledge of each of these freshmen on Penn State's roster that we're all going to learn a lot more about in the months and years ahead. Tyler, appreciate that perspective. We're going to get you back on for our second episode later this week. We're also going to bring Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen into the fold. I teased it earlier. I'll just let you know what we're going to do. We're bringing back our 11-man draft. I don't believe we did it last summer. We've done it 3 or 4 times in the history of this podcast. It's always a fun exercise, especially as we're working our way towards preseason camp. This will be the first time, though, Tyler, we're bringing in a 4th draft picker. So you're going to have to, we're going to have to really know this roster. We're going to be getting 44 guys combined, 11 guys on each team. They got to go both ways. And so stay tuned to that episode to hear us make fools of ourselves and maybe put together some impressive rosters. We'll see how it all turns out. But that's it for this episode. Tyler, anything else to add before we say goodbye to you?
Now, I'll say this. I'm looking forward to this draft, man. But you know me, my team might have a bunch of young guys on it at the end of the day. As well as I like to think that I know the roster, I love my young guys. So I'm looking forward to this, man. It's going to be fun.
Hey, feel free to take all the young, thin freshmen that you want and leave the big, strong 22-year-olds to the rest of us. That's going to work just fine. Tyler, we'll catch up with you next episode. Thank you so much for your coverage.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Glad to be back.
Good stuff, as always, from Tyler Calvaruso. Make sure you're following his content on a daily basis over at Lions247.com. A lot more fun coming your way later in the week here on the podcast. We'll get that 11-man draft cooking. You'll get a chance to critique us throughout, and we'll have a lot of fun doing it. For now, stepping aside, I am Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions247 Podcast.